Hey friends, my name's Lisa if we haven't met, and if we have, welcome back to my pottery studio. I am very glad you're here today. I am going to be doing a studio tour in loading a Bisque kiln, big kiln right behind me here. And I thought it'd be a good opportunity to just talk to you guys about having a kiln at home, if that's something that you're starting to think about or starting to dream about. My goal would be to make you feel very comfortable about it, because it might feel like a scary thing, but it's really not that scary of a thing at all. But I do want to share with you kind of my kilns, how I fire at a high level, and just some things to keep in mind if you're starting to look at going down that road. You may have noticed in some of my previous videos that I do have two kilns. They are both made by L&L. This is not necessarily an endorsement for L&L, but I will say that I've been very happy with them. This big girl over here I've had for over 20 years. Now granted, I am not a production potter. I've mentioned this before. I'm a hobby potter, so I don't fire nearly as much as a production potter would, but this has been held up really well for me. I've moved it multiple times. She's been a great, fantastic girl. I got the baby kiln or the doll kiln here several years ago when I was really focused on glaze formulations and glaze testing. And when you're doing that, when you're studying glaze chemistry, all you're really making are little tiles that are like this big. And I wanted to be able to fire them more, quickly. And I didn't want to just fire a big empty kiln with just like 10 little tiny test tiles in it. So I was very fortunate, and I was able to buy the doll kiln so that I could do a lot of glaze testing a lot faster at home. So that's why I have this, but it is also very nice. I can probably fit about 6 mugs in here. So if I wanted to do a quick batch of something, this comes in quite handy. Okay, but for today, I am going to be loading my big kiln, or bigger kiln. Don't want to crush that. And I don't have a ton of stuff to bisque fire, so it's going to be a pretty empty load still. Bisque fires, you can really pack a lot into. You can stack things on top of each other. It can be a really efficient firing. I just have enough stuff that I want to get bisque so I can start glazing it. So I'm going to go ahead and put all this stuff in. It's going to feel pretty empty, really, I think, but we'll see. Okay, so generally what I want to do is I'm going to do a lot of the shorter things on the first shelf. So I'm going to start with all these mugs that are not really mugs. Have you ever seen a more useless mug? This is for a test I'm going to do coming up, so you'll get to see what that's going to look like later. But I'm going to find some kiln furniture that is just tall enough, maybe even too tall, that all these mugs will fit under. Best practice is to have at least 3 kiln shelves or kiln posts per shelf. So at least 3 of these guys to support. I am being careful. My thermocouples are right here. So these are the things that are inside the kiln that are measuring the temperature as it's firing and adjusting the firing rates and stuff like that. So I don't want anything touching it. I don't want anything too close to it. Fit as many of these as I can. Now I like to stagger my shelves. So what I will do, and what I mean by that is that I'll do half a kiln shelf at one height and then do the next kiln half at another height. And that kind of allows more of the airflow through the kiln. So I do maybe 1 step higher on the other half. That kiln shelf down. Sometimes it's like a game of Tetris. On the bottom shelf, I do want to put an Orton cone or 2. If you're new to firing, Orton cones are these little guys. And what they do is basically measure to make sure that the chemical reaction that we need to happen in the kiln for our clay to get fired to the degree that we want it to get fired to for each firing actually occurs. Cones are more than what I'll probably be able to explain to you in this video, but they can be considered a measure of how hot your kiln is getting or not getting. Realistically, in real chemical terms, it's the measure of a chemical reaction that's occurring. And they're helping us make sure that reaction actually happened in the kiln. So I'm not going to talk too much about that, but maybe in another video I'll try to explain cones in more detail. But for now, I'm going to put 2 on the very bottom shelf right next to each other. And that's going to tell me if the kiln is going to be firing evenly. So I'll put maybe 2 more on a second or third shelf over here. Also kind of stepping back for a second. If If you're considering getting a kiln, if you've been doing pottery, then you're probably familiar with a bisque fire. You know that we fire clay once to get it bisqued. This is a process called sintering. Sintering, right, our vocabulary word for the day today, is the process of firing, or the stage of firing a clay body where the clay particles do not get fully melted or fully fused together, but they get partially melted, partially fused together. What that leaves us with is a very porous clay body, and that is what we want for when we go to glaze. If we did not have a porous clay body, when we went to glaze, the glaze would not adhere to our pot, and then it'd be very difficult to have a nice result, obviously. I kind of started loading this like it was a glaze kiln, and I forgot. Bisque kilns, everything can touch each other. That is not a worry. Anything, I can't probably put another shelf up or this will be too tall. So I want to make sure that I can get this in. I'm going to go ahead and put these bowls in, and I will stack them. Then I have these wonderful little guys, these little salt and pepper shakers that I made that will fit in around the bowl really well. I remember when I first got my kiln, being really anxious about it, being really nervous, thinking, oh God, what if I burn my house down, you know? And the more I've fired and the more I've gotten comfortable with it, obviously that anxiety goes away. But I do want to assure you that they're really pretty safe things. They are like an oven that just gets exceptionally hotter than your standard oven. I think the biggest thing to worry about if you are going to get a kiln is just making sure that you have a qualified electrician hook it up. So all kilns require, I think generally speaking, all kilns require a specific outlet, a specific cable size, and a specific breaker. And if you provide all that information to your electrician, they will know what to do and they will hook it up. I had one time in the last house I was in where I fired the kiln and it tripped the breaker. And I thought, well, I think there was a storm going on at the time. And I thought, well, maybe there was some kind of power glitch or whatever. So I just started the kiln again and it tripped a second time. And that's when I got concerned. I called the electrician came out. There wasn't anything wrong except the terminals on the breaker side where the wires connected weren't fully seated. So I don't honestly know if that ever could have caused a fire, started a fire, but that's the side of it that I would be the most concerned about. Now, around the kiln here you can see that I've got hardy backer. It's unlikely, as long as you give good distance around your kiln, that it's going to catch anything on fire around it. But you don't want to put like, you know, a couch next to it or something obvious like that. But I put the hardy backer just to be safe because there's insulation right here. I didn't want that to melt. I keep a good distance of stuff. This is here just while I'm filming, but it'll go away. I've got a good 8 inches between these two things. So I feel comfortable and safe with that. But a lot of it could also just very well depend on what your comfort level is and what your safety level is. Personally, electric kilns, I think, are really quite safe. Other thing I will say is it's definitely important to consider venting your kiln. So when you bisque fire, I think it's even particularly when you bisque fire, there's a lot of gases that are getting released from the clay body as it's going through that firing process. And if you're not venting your kiln, those fumes will be in the atmosphere around you. They do stink. It will give you a headache. And so particularly if you're like myself and you have your kiln in your basement and you have a bedroom above it, I highly recommend venting it so that those fumes aren't going up into your living space and you're not breathing that in. Now, if your kiln is in a shed, maybe outside, and you're not going to be in that space while it's firing, you don't necessarily need to vent your kiln. It's not going to change or affect the way that your pots are getting fired. It's really just for your health and your comfort in your space. I should also say that I'm speaking specifically to firing an electric kiln. Really two kind of common types of kilns. There's also some very cool kilns like wood fire kilns and raku kilns and things like that. But in general, in a studio, in a production studio space, or a community studio, if that's what you're in, there's electric kilns and gas kilns is pretty much what you're going to see. I only have an electric kiln. I've only ever had an electric kiln. I've never had a gas kiln. In electric kilns, we are doing something called an oxidation firing. So oxidation means that during the firing process, our pieces have access to oxygen. So this is more relevant during the glaze fire. But a reduction kiln, you might hear oxidation and reduction. Reduction, think of it like we're reducing oxygen. Oxidation, we're offering oxygen. So that's the difference between oxidation and reduction. That's how I think of it. The way that you would reduce oxygen generally is through a flame, right? So when there's fire, fire consumes the oxygen, pulls it away and makes it not available to our clay and glazes as they're firing. And with that, then you get different results in your clay and glaze pieces. So I do remember getting asked as an early potter, oh, by an experienced potter, and they're, oh, are you firing an oxidation or reduction? And I was like, I have no idea. I don't even know what you're talking about. So in the electric kiln, obviously we don't have an actual flame. It isn't actually a fire that is heating up the kiln. It's these elements that I mentioned, those metal coils that go around the kiln, and everything gets really, really hot, but there's not actually a flame or a fire in the electric kiln. So we would say that this is an oxidation state. Now, if you're in a gas kiln, you could offer into that atmosphere a flame, which would, again, that fire would suck the oxygen out of that atmosphere and would create that reduction environment. I personally fire to cone 6. I don't think there's any shame in that. It might not be as hot as the cool kids do, but I'll do another video maybe someday on why I'm a mid-range girly. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about there, in ceramics, there's really 3 different, I'm going to say, firing ranges. So there's low fire ceramics, there's mid-range ceramics, which is what I do, and then there's high fire. So high fire is going to be like cone 10, mid-range is like cone 6, 7. Low fire can be as low as like, I think 04. These would be things like maybe your Christmas ornaments and things that are casted often can be low fire. The first ceramics class I ever took was actually a low fire ceramics class. Everything was poured into molds, and so then you could buy each individual piece. So you could buy like it was like a cookie jar that was casted, and you'd buy the greenware piece and you'd clean it up, and then they would bisque it for you, and then you could glaze it yourself, and then they'd fire it for you. And I loved that, but I don't think my parents loved it so much because you had to buy each piece. That probably got pretty expensive for them now that I look back on it. So I've got my dog bowl in here that I'm really hoping I want to fit in. I thought this load was going to be like really, really light, and it's filled up a lot faster than what I thought it would. Oh good, Ellie's water bowl is going to make it. So what that means, when I say I fired a cone 6, that means at the glaze fire, cone 6 is the firing range that I'm shooting for. I bisque to cone 06, which is a lot lower temperature. If you're curious about the cones and the temperature chart, I'll put a link below to the Orton cone chart so you can kind of get a sense of how hot that is. But I bisque to 06. That is because I have found that for my glazes, that's the best bisque temperature for me to get the glaze adhesion that I want. Meaning that I know what kind of absorption of that glaze I'm going to get on that clay body. So it has really just been kind of through trial and error that I have found that has been kind of the best bisque temperature for my clay body. So this is a porcelain clay body. It's made by Laguna. It's called number 16 porcelain. And that's what I've done all of my testing with. So I have found personally that if I bisque to 06 and glaze to 6, I've generally gotten very consistent, very good results. So clay bodies and glazes are all chemically formulated for those different firing ranges. So my clay and my glaze is all formulated for a cone 6 or a mid-range firing program. Now, if you fire to cone 10, then you want to make sure that you have a cone 10 clay body and a cone 10 glaze. I am curious, if you're in the cone 10 club, I'm curious what you bisque to. Just for kind of a reference, I am a cone 6 club, cone 6 girly. and it's easy for me to remember. I fired a cone 6 for glaze and a 06 for bisque, but I'm curious if you fired a cone 10. Leave me a comment below and let me know like what you typically bisque to, because I'm curious. I'm guessing maybe you would still bisque to 05 to 07 kind of range, but I'm not sure. So anywho, depending on which firing range you decide to go forward with, you do just want to be careful of that. If I put my cone 6 clay body into a cone 10 glaze, it would slump and it would melt because it is not formulated to hold its structure at that high of a temperature. If I had a cone 10 clay body and I put it into a cone 6 glaze, it would not get fully fired. It would not slump, but it probably also wouldn't hold water. Okay, so I keep a firing log with just a record of every time I fire my kiln. I have one for each kiln, and I just make a note of the date, which program I fired. I'll talk about that in a second. What cone I fired to. I'll make a note of how long it took. This is a good thing to track because if your kiln starts taking longer and longer, that can be an indication that your elements are starting to degrade. You might want to consider replacing your elements. I'm also going to make a note of what final temp it got to based on the control and what it says the temperature was. And then I'll just make some notes about the witness cones that I put in, if they melted fully as I expected them to or not. So all these things are just kind of helping me keep track of if my kiln is functioning as I want it to and working the way I want it to, because elements in your kiln do wear out and you do have to replace them from time to time. So the common things to replace are going to be your thermocouples and your elements. The elements are all these metal wires that you see running through the kiln. My kiln has these ceramic kind of protective, I guess, shelves that they set in, but those can degrade over time. I've had to replace them on this kiln several times. It's not a big deal, but when your firing starts to get a little bit less consistent, those are the things that you want to pay attention to know, like, do I need to do some maintenance? I'm going to put 2 more witness cones in, just like I did before. I didn't really show what they look like. They come in boxes like this. And then on the side here, you can see what cone this is rated for, what temperature it's rated for. I struggle saying temperature because there's a lot more to it than just like how hot physically the kiln is getting. But that's a story for another day. So I'm going to put another 2 witness cones in here on that second shelf, and that gives me 2 spots in my kiln because I can then see if, you know, the top is getting hotter or colder than the bottom, or if it's not firing as evenly. Okay, friends, so what I'm looking for when I have these witness cones in, when I open the kiln, once it's done firing, I'm going to go to those witness cones and I'm going to look for something like this. So it will lose its color, but that's kind of irrelevant. What we're looking for is to see how far the cone slumped down. Now, if I had an 06 cone in my 06 firing, this is exactly what I want it to look like, okay? I want it to look like it slumped just about down to where it would be pointing to like 3 o'clock if you're looking at it as a clock. That's how I know, and I believe reading the instructions on the Orton site, that's how I understand it, is that this would be a successful cone 06 firing if this was a cone 06 witness cone. Now, if my cone actually looked something like this, I would know that I didn't quite hit that cone 06 mark, right? And if it slumped all the way down and looked like this, I would know that it got over the cone 06 mark. So what you can do is actually put a couple different witness cones. So you can have a cone that's rated for 06, maybe 05, maybe 07, one on each side of what your target is. And then you can see which one slumped to that like 3 o'clock mark. And then you'll know that cone is about how hot your kiln got. Okay. I was able to get in the kiln everything that I was hoping to fire. It is still a pretty empty kiln, I would say. In a lot of Bisque kilns, you'll see just things piled and piled on top of each other, which you can do in a Bisque kiln, which is great. They're not going to stick together because, again, we're only getting to that point where things are sintered. The clay particles are sintered. It doesn't hit that fully glassy phase where you might have, if 2 things are touching, that they would actually stick to each other. So we're just getting it sintered. We're just getting it bisqued. I don't have more stuff to put in here, so I'm happy. I will say, if you're trying to make money in pottery, you probably want to try and get as much stuff in your Bisque kiln as you possibly can, because it does cost money to fire your kiln, right? So the more efficient you can be, the more things you can get into the kiln, the better. Depending on your kiln and your kiln manufacturer, your controller is probably going to look a little bit different than mine. This is also an older controller. So what I love about mine though is I have these easy fire settings, and honestly that is all I use. So effectively this kiln comes with pre-programmed firings. So there is a slow bisque, a fast bisque, a slow glaze, and a fast glaze. The aesthetic of my pottery and what I'm shooting for and what I'm making does not require me to really have a custom firing schedule. Now, if you wanted to get into like crystalline glazes and things like that, those have a very particular firing schedule. So if you're going to invest in a kiln and that's something that you think you might shoot for one day, I would look into the controllers that are the easiest to configure for that. Mine, you can absolutely do it. I have to pull out the manual every time to like remember how to go through that process and how to set it up. But I honestly, all I really ever use are these easy fire buttons. For a bisque, I always do the slow bisque option, and this might be like an old wives' tale, but your bisque firing, there's a lot of gases that are getting released from your clay body, and I feel like I heard somewhere or read somewhere that the more of those gases that you can get to release and pull out of your clay body during the bisque fire, the better your glaze fire might go, because those gases aren't trying to escape while the glaze is also melting, which can cause like pinholing and things like that. So I think a long time ago I was using a commercial glaze and I was getting a lot of pinholing, and I did some research and it said just to bisque slower, and I started doing that and I didn't really have any problems with pinholing after that, so I just continued doing that. Now for a glaze fire, I just do the fast glaze because I want it to be done as fast as possible and see how my pots came out. My kiln has an on-off switch here on the right hand side. I flip it on. The first time you flip it on, mine will generally say like error idle, hit start stop, and then it'll start to review the current temperature in the kiln. So it's saying it's 88 degrees inside the kiln right now. It's saying it's idle. It's reading thermocouple 2. I will just enter the program that I want to do. I'm going to say a slow bisque. It confirms slow bisque. Hit enter. Cone. I'm going to say 06. It remembers from the last time I did a slow bisque that I fired to 06. So I can just hit enter again. Hold. I don't put a hold on it. Hold means that when it gets to the top temperature, it'll stay there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half hour, however long you wanted it to. I don't have a need to do that, so I don't enter any hold time. And enter, and I can just hit start stop. And after a second or two, you will hear it click on that, and I know it's firing. So my kiln vent is actually up here above my TV. I did a whole video, you have to scroll a little ways back, but I'll link it below as well, on how I vented my kiln, which was quite an adventure, I will say. But anyway, tucked behind the magic curtain in the TV over here is the plug that I'll plug my vent into, and that will turn it on, and I will have that venting. It makes a lot of noise, so I'm not going to do it while I'm filming, but I will have that running the whole time this bisque fire is going. Okay, so I expect this bisque fire, the actual firing process, to take about 12 hours to complete. If you did a fast bisque, it'd probably be half that, but I like to do the slow bisque. So, and that's the time from when the kiln starts till when the firing is complete. It's gotten to temperature and it stops heating and lets it start, it'll start cooling down naturally. I will let my kiln get down to maybe like 600 degrees or so, and then I will start propping it open and letting it cool down a little bit faster so I can get the pieces out and move along. If I don't have any rush, there's nothing wrong with just letting it cool down naturally all on its own. You can open it up weeks later, it doesn't matter. So friends, I'm trying to think of some other notes that I might share with you about having a kiln. It's awesome. If you have the capacity to get a kiln, oh man, the freedom you have and the things that you can do when you're not kind of beholden to like a studio firing schedule is so awesome. I'm going to buy a new kiln today. I would maybe get one a little bit smaller than this kiln. Like I said, it takes me a while before I fill up this kiln because I'm just a hobby potter. I'm doing this on the weekends, so I'm not producing a ton of stuff. I will also say this kiln is very difficult to get through doorways, and so having to move it, I've had to disassemble it multiple times, and that is a pain in the rear. I love having the small test kiln. That was one of my favorite purchases, was just having a small kiln. I'm not sure I would say that I would start with a baby kiln, because if you're using commercial glazes and stuff like that and you're not really diving into that aspect of ceramics just yet, you really don't have a lot of room in the small kilns. But I fell in love with glaze testing, and so I loved having that access, that ability. So it makes perfect sense for me to have two kilns, maybe not for everybody. But I would say if you're a home potter, this is a good size, but I would maybe get something that was narrower and taller. I can't say that I've ever thrown a platter or anything that was so big, like diameter wise, that I, you know, maxed out the diameter of the kiln. So I don't really know that I need it to be as wide as it is. And so for space and savings and stuff like that, I think I would get something that was maybe narrower and taller, and then it would be easier to move. So vocabulary lesson for today is sintering. Sintering, or getting sintered, is the process that our clay body is going through when it is in the bisque kiln. We want to maybe do some testing and playing with our clay to see at what cone you want to bisque to get the right application of glaze that you're looking for. We want to remember to use witness cones to make sure that our kiln is firing evenly and as expected. And we want to remember to turn on our kiln vent so we don't get headaches from the fumes. We want to make sure there's nothing on top of or in immediate proximity to our kiln when it is firing. Bisque fire, remember, you want to pack that kiln as much as you possibly can. You do not want to do that during a glaze fire though. Big difference between the two there. I will absolutely do another video the next time I do a glaze fire, and I will show you how I load my kiln for a glaze fire. Someday down the road, if I get the courage, I will try to explain cones in a little bit better detail, but I will also link below another video that is actually very helpful in explaining that from Ceramic Materials Workshop, which is a great group. If you're not following them, go follow them. Your comments, by the way, absolutely mean the world to me. It gives me so much joy and so much motivation to make more content. I think it's amazing. Like tell me where you're at too, because I freaking love it. I have folks from South Africa, which is awesome, and the UK and Australia commenting, and it just tickles me. So let me know where you're at in the world. If you found this helpful, I really appreciate it if you give me a like and a subscribe, and I will absolutely do more content on firing. If there's any specific questions you have, let me know. I'll try to address them in the comments or in an upcoming video. But I'm going to leave you with that here today. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I hope this was helpful, and we'll see you on the next one.